video is a very good explanation of what the deal is. And now what I'd like to do is give you all a chance to give you a chance to talk. So, Linda.
In the movie, in the film there, he only mentions Mexicans, but doesn't this go along with all, what'd you say, 11 countries?
It's 11 other countries. The most significant for us in terms of immigration would be Mexico, and also Malaysia. We don't currently have a lot of immigration from Malaysia, but that's how it starts. There actually are a significant number of H-1Bs already coming from Malaysia, and it's a populous country. That's how the chain migration flows start, is when we open up a program like this. Vietnam, I think, is also a big concern. They're one of the countries in it. China, I mean, we don't, Japan and Australia, probably not going to get huge numbers. We already have a trade agreement with Chile. They're part of it. But there's just no need for any immigration provisions. We're happy to trade, sell goods there. But, this is just unnecessary.
Right.
So, yes, ma'am.
Jessica, when you put information up on the website, would you be willing to give us the names of some of these senators and congressmen that we should target from one side or the other? I assume that when we talk to Democrats, we may urge them to vote against this for one reason that's slightly different from the reason we're going to have Republicans vote against it. Is that right?
It can be. I think the issue of unlimited immigration and the impact on the American jobs market ought to be good for everybody. But sometimes, it doesn't work with everyone. But theoretically, I think that's worth mentioning to everyone. But you're right. Democrats are not concerned with giving fast-track authority to the president because they think they're willing to trust. Republicans aren't. So, but with the Democrats, it's just trade agreements. That's pretty much been a big issue. I have to say, what stopped the last episode of these trade agreements under the Bush administration was Nancy Pelosi's, when she took over the House of Representatives. It all stopped for a while. So, John.
May I make a suggestion?
Yes.
Things have been in flux, as Jessica was saying. Just last evening and the evening before that, things were happening. We had intended to have a series of action items for you tonight, but that was not possible based on what's going on. But I would like to suggest that we put our heads together and, point to those things that are particularly timely in the highest best use of our time, and provide talking points, names, etc. But we need to know who would like to participate at whatever level, whatever time you spend, they can call, write letters, whatever. We have everybody's name tonight, so we'll take it upon ourselves to put this package together and then email it to you within the next week or less, depending on what happens.
I mean, I would say the action agenda is call your own member of Congress and the two senators at a minimum. I mean, that is something for sure that needs to happen. And, that's something easy. If you want to go beyond that, we can talk about other people to be targeted. Certainly, I think there needs to be a little bit more public discussion about this issue in general, because right now people are thinking it has to do with climate change or, child labor or something, that's why, and that just doesn't rise to the level of concern that open borders should, I think. Not that they're not important, these other issues are not important, but something that affects us very closely are the immigration implications. And it's an easy talking point. No immigration provisions in the trade agreements whatsoever, and no fast-track authority. That's pretty much it. And ask them what their position is, because we need to, it's helpful for us all to know maybe who in the Massachusetts delegation is squishy on it, and tell each other so that other people can start calling them as well. So, yes?
Does Congress know that there's this immigration provision in there?
No. They don't. A lot of them do. Some people do, but most of them don't.
Because if the Democrats were to find out, wouldn't they all of a sudden be for it? Because they'll do anything the president wants as far as immigration?
And that's why I think it's important to not just trust that they'll be opposed on the grounds of climate change and child labor and things like that. It's important, I believe, to engage the Democrats on the fact that we're not creating enough jobs for Americans, and certainly not enough for Americans and legal immigrants, and that this is one of the main things that will keep American wages and opportunities low for decades to come. And if they're concerned about income inequality and how much the level of wages, this is not going to help. But I think they believe that when the U.S. trade rep says things like, we're not changing immigration law, that's not the whole story. It means we can never change immigration law again. And I think that would start to resonate. So they're aware that this issue is out there, that the trade agreements issue is there, but they're not aware of the implications of it, and they're certainly not aware of how voters feel about it, of how opposed people would be.
I would be afraid that, how they're always talking in certain sections like cities and stuff, that people with green cards should be able to vote. I mean, that would be, they could probably be for this because it gives them votes out there.
They might, that line of thought is definitely out there, and I think that's why some Democrats may support it. But they have a big problem in that organized labor has taken a stance against it, and they need that support also. I mean, this is one of the few immigration-related issues in which organized American labor actually is taking a principled stand on behalf of the interests of American workers, which they don't usually do with immigration, but I don't have an explanation as to why. Maybe they do get how big it is, but this is, we have that on our side. So let me just go to the other side of the room and then I'll come back.
Yeah, I don't typically understand a movement of natural persons trade. Do these immigrants have to come over with the companies, or when you say mass immigration, it sounds like a different type of immigration than people walking on the border. Are they going to use this as an argument to say it's not really mass immigration?
They will say that they will come on visas, or they will be coming for employment opportunities, and if they're not working, then the government will deport them, right? Just like the Obama administration has record deportations. They tried to say that it's, we're not changing immigration law, but that's very misleading, because the truth is that nobody will be able, any move by Congress in the future to tighten up immigration would be seen as a trade barrier instead of an immigration law. That's what India has been trying, as I said, for years. I mean, it sounds surreal to talk about it in those terms, but believe me, I've talked to enough people who are involved in this. I remember distinctly having a conversation with one of the trade negotiators who did the Chile treaty about a decade ago, and him insisting that this treaty had nothing to do with immigration. I said, but there's people coming to work from other countries into the United States. That's immigration. He said, no, it's workers. It's trade and services. It's movement of natural persons. And it was like talking to a robot. Right. Like they just have decided that it's not immigration. And if we keep saying it's not immigration, then it's not immigration. But yeah, oh, absolutely. Well, under the law now, our dysfunctional immigration law, people with H-1B visas can stay until they get a green card if they have an employer who wants them. And under the rules of these trade agreements, if a company just decided it wanted to do all its hiring, it wanted to recruit overseas, they would have the freedom of movement just like the European Union has. So one country who signed on to the treaty, their immigration laws don't mean anything anymore because they're coming, it's free movement of, it's natural, free movement of persons. It's trade in services. Your labor is a service. That's how they see it. It's a factor of production. So. It would prevent us from blocking a lot of the movement of people from the 12 countries. Now, one of the differences between NAFTA and this agreement is that in NAFTA, the negotiators actually made a list of all the jobs that people from Canada and Mexico could come to the United States to do. And the only workers who were let in were people who were in those particular jobs. And it's a relatively narrow list of types of jobs. This is why we haven't had the whole country of Mexico move here already under NAFTA, because it was limited. But the offers since then in trade agreements do not specify occupations or even always visa categories. It's very, very open-ended. That's the problem. And once it's signed, once it's done, it's done. So, yes?
Jessica, I'm concerned on the issue of transparency, or apparently the lack thereof. I think it's ridiculous to allow any congressperson to sign something they haven't read. And can not there be a movement in that direction? Can't we, as the people who have put these folks in office, insist, at least by phone calls, if no other way, that there be transparency before the bill is even considered?
That would be logical. I think that's a very common sense approach. And that is one of the huge problems, is that nobody really knows what's in the agreement. There are people who've seen leaks from other countries, and so that's how we have an idea of what's in it. What has been proposed, I think it's in the Senate now, is something that would mandate that the trade agreements be posted on a website for the public to see. I think it's 90 days before a vote, and Congress gets, or maybe it's 60 days for the public, 90 days for lawmakers to read. That would help, but I personally do not have the level of trust in our members of Congress that even if they had the chance to read it, that they actually would.
5 days to go over the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
And then they did it overnight.
Right. Yeah. That it's still, I mean, the ultimate, the first thing is that there should be, Congress needs the right to amend whatever the executive negotiates. That's the first principle. Because if Congress gives that up, they might as well go home. I mean, you know, what are they there for? So it's this, you know, constitutional separation of powers question that's very important too. And simply knowing what's in it, they would still have to vote either up or down. And I don't think that, you know, I just don't have confidence that they would exercise their authority unless they have the ability to make amendments. And now the president doesn't like that because, yeah, well, he says, how can we negotiate, you know, how can I go in there and make offers and promise things if the Congress is just going to change it? I understand that, but, you know, and that's when, you know, we can also come back to this issue of like, then you need to promise that there are going to be no immigration things in the trade agreement whatsoever, and they won't promise that. That's the other problem. It's like the administration itself is not a trustworthy entity in this whole thing.
If they're not calling this immigration, then Congress isn't going to call it immigration.
Right, it's just like the executive action wasn't amnesty, it was prosecutorial discretion. they have a way of trying to just redefine it, but yes.
Well, if this is all done in secret, then how could Congress even know what's in it to vote on it if it's all supposed to be kept secret?
Well, the idea is that they would announce it, and like what the president wants to happen is that he just gets to announce it and say, okay, up or down, and don't dare vote this down, because then, we've seen this, right, like with the Iran agreement and everything else. But the problem with the secrecy is that nobody has a chance to find out what's really in it and spread the word, and he knows that, and that's what, right, exactly. So it's, it really is several things. Transparency is an argument in and of itself, but again, we come back to, okay, what's in it? They wouldn't have a problem negotiating a free trade agreement if it were just about free trade, I believe. We need to educate people that it is not just transparency, it's not just constitutional separation of powers, it is the substance of what is in the trade agreement also, and that's bad. The immigration provisions that should not be on the table at all. So, yes?
I saw that Rand Paul is in favor of it. It's on screen. Do you know if the any of the other Republican potential or nominees have spoken about this?
My understanding is that Scott Walker is against it. Ted Cruz is for it.
Oh, I can't believe that.
He's always been he's always avoided the issue of legal immigration, or if he hasn't avoided it, he's been in favor of more guest worker visas and stuff. He's been very good on illegal immigration. He's also educatable, though. I'm not sure about Rand Paul. I would think that as a libertarian, he would be reflexively in favor of free trade, and that's a reasonable position for a libertarian until they, but they have to understand this isn't just about that. So,
we have time for a couple more, and then we're going to miss them.
Could we get these announcements in first?
Sure.
And then we have more questions. I don't want to stop the questions, but
Also, you'd be willing to stay over.
Absolutely, until the library kicks us
it's
out.
not over. We just said that we had some announcements for the day.
Rob?
Sure.
I think most of you know me by now. Well, maybe that's good, maybe it isn't.
Yay.
Tomorrow night, I will be hosting a meeting at the Embassy Suites, usually last Wednesday of every month. We're going to bring in Catherine White. Most people know who Catherine White is. Yes, no? Yeah. She's going to be talking about Article 5, the Convention of Constitutional Changes. And she's going to tell us a little bit as to why that would be a disaster or a risk. And it would also be quite the gamble. So we don't know what either side would do if we start introducing different amendments to the Constitution. It's going to be either we enforce it or we amend it. So I'm for enforcing it. I don't know about the rest of you. Catherine, she's a Massachusetts native and a graduate of Massachusetts Institute of Technology. After a number of years as an engineer, she switched tracks, and she does her own accounting business since 1997. She spoke at many tax day rallies, various civic and political groups, and part of panels discussing the Constitution with Pacific Rim countries and for the State Department. So I think it would be, we're going to have that at the Embassy Suites tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. That's on Route 20 in Marlboro. For those who are interested, love to have you. Another interesting announcement, I just got this off the printer before I showed up here tonight. How many people know of Rabbi Jonathan Hausman? Oh, a good chunk of you. Well, guess who's coming back on May 12th? Dennis Michael Lynch. He, as Jessica spoke very well tonight, is also part of the illegal immigration issue and how it is impacting us as a country. That is May 12th at the Hava Torah congregation. That is in Stoughton, Massachusetts. That's at 7:30. Suggested donations $15 for a pre-registration and $20 payable at the door. If you haven't seen Dennis Michael Lynch in action, he's awesome. Okay, we had him last year, was it, John? In Hudson. And he's unbelievable. So if you haven't seen him in person, you may have seen him on TV, on some of the news stations, Fox and CNN and so forth. But he's something to see. So if anybody needs any information, just see me afterwards. And there's another one on May 18th. It's a topic called From Austria to Israel. We're going to have a couple of speakers there. It's about the worldwide assault on Christians and Jews. So that's at May 18th, same time, same place, same pre-registration. It's a couple of people, Elizabeth Sabadich-Wolf. She's an Austrian human rights and anti-Sharia activist. She's going to cover also new Australian law on Islam and why this law is relevant for the United States. Also along with that is a gal by the name of Renee Mahdi. She's an Assyrian-born Iraqi and raised in Syria. As we've heard from Brigitte Gabrielle, she also has a story to talk about. Her family had to flee Syria and managed to immigrate into Austria under Geneva Convention Refugee Act. So that would be kind of an interesting discussion as well. I don't think Ray Han is here tonight, so I know he was invited, but he had passed this along and so forth. So those are two real good events that I just wanted to share that quickly with you tonight. And if you get a chance, by all means, please do so. Okay? Thank you very much.
There is anybody else? In here in the back, for Governor Baker to stop Common Core. And that's something that those of you who are familiar with Common Core, how many understand Common Core? To stop this. And if you'll help us, there's on the back, and she's got a copy of it. Thank you. Are there other announcements? People are to leave. Wait, no, you can't leave yet. You've got 9 more minutes. Sorry. So we got to have more questions and learn a little bit more.
Sure, I want to respect people's time. By all means, if you have to go, please do. But if there are some more questions, I'm happy to take them. Yes?
Recently, we've been hearing about the difference between a presidential treaty and a presidential agreement, and mostly in the discussion regarding Iran. That's only one country. That's an agreement, presidential agreement going on between our country and Iran. Is the trade agreement more complex because there are more than 2 nations involved, which causes the binding nature of the United States, because it's more than 2 nations? Because if it's only an agreement, the next president can change. If it's considered a treaty, which it should be, if it's considered a treaty, we're going to agree not to have any nuclear weapons in Iran. If we agree that it's a treaty, then the Congress has to approve it the Senate has to approve it by 3/4. So
I think is it 3/4 or 2/3?
2/3, I think. And yeah. So if it's it sounds like this all sounds very, very vastly more complex than a simple agreement. The distinction between an agreement and a treaty. Will this be in the nature of a treaty or an agreement? And an agreement can be changed changed by the next president? But you said it can't be. Once our Congress agrees to it, well, that's the Congress agreeing to it, isn't it? That's like the treaty.
It's a treaty that would go beyond the next,
Okay.
I mean, it would be in force until,
Congress has to approve it.
yes,
I mean,
well, the Senate,
has to approve it.
right. But once it does, then it's done.
Okay.
And we would potentially be subject to sanctions if we did something that an international tribunal decided was against the treaty.
Jessica, what's the timing on this resistance? I mean, is there a deadline, and when should we have to mass our forces?
Good question. I think the president would have liked to have had the fast-track authority yesterday, if not sooner, but he's running into opposition from his own party. And now there's talk in the Senate of trying to pass some conditions on getting to fast-track authority. But I really believe that this whole thing is going to be way harder for him to get than he expected. And I would like to think that it can be stopped. That if Congress puts the brakes on it and says, no fast-track authority, we're willing to take a look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership without immigration provisions. And this is what we were able to do with the Chile and the Singapore agreements, and one with Australia as well. Is, you know, they weren't fast-tracked, and the immigration provisions had to go. There were still a few narrow guest worker provisions, which are immigration provisions, but they were very small numbers. Like in one country, it was like 5,000 as a cap, because the George Bush administration at the time said, we're doing some guest workers. Like, you know, they were hell-bent on getting something in there because they had promised it to these other countries. So they felt that it was like a matter of honor that they had to offer some kind of concession on immigration. But I think we can really limit it. This is what's happening. Many of you have heard of the World Trade Organization. Mm-hmm. They've been trying to get a huge group of nations to sign these common principles with promises on freer movement of people for a long, long time now, at least 10 years. And they haven't been able to do it because there are really, I believe, just too many competing interests and too many moving parts of all these different industries, whether it's financial services or manufacturing or agriculture. And when it comes right down to it, very few countries are actually willing to relinquish their sovereignty in many ways. The European Union is really an exception to this. And we see how well that's working out these days. So when the rubber hits the road, it seems to always be the United States that's like bending over backwards to try to get everyone to sign on to it. And we're willing to give up whatever it takes for those huge, multinational corporations, many of whom are based in the United States, who lobby for this stuff. But I've seen it happen be fast. The whole thing is a house of cards, that it doesn't take much to kick out a couple of those cards and the whole thing comes crashing down. So that's all we need to do is get enough Democrats to balk and enough Republicans to balk, and the whole thing is over for a few years. And then they'll come back, the U.S. Trade Representative will come back with a much more narrowly focused thing on either few industries or just that's really just about trade in goods, or maybe financial, something that's okay, that's something we can all support, because we're not, again, it's so hard for me to talk to conservatives about this sometimes, because it's not that trade is bad, it's that the agreements that they try to pass off as trade are flawed, and we cannot give up our sovereignty. So I think, the whole thing will collapse if we can just kick out a few cards.
Who is it that does the infighting in our behalf there in Washington?
On our behalf or on our country's behalf? Well, then, yeah, they're the same thing, right? We're fighting for what's in the national interest.
The politicians don't understand it until somebody kicks them and makes sure they understand. Who are the kickers?
members of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Jeff Sessions from Alabama has written a Dear Colleague letter to his fellow senators telling them about the immigration provisions and the meaning of it. Elizabeth Warren, our own senator, has been doing the same kind of thing on the Democratic side. In the House, John Boehner is all for this, of course. But again, there are, I think that the Republicans can be rallied in the House. I don't think they're educated enough about it yet, but there are some who've lived through this before, like Representative Lamar Smith is the one who scuttled some of the previous ones from the House Judiciary Committee. Paul Ryan is all for it. He's pushing it from the House side. And it's all that Ways and Means group, that are usually great on tax issues and things like that, but they have a blind spot when it comes to these trade agreements. I think that the thing now is to just keep slowing it down. It's run into obstacles, and that's a good thing. The fact that it hasn't been voted on yet is a good thing, and we have time to educate everyone. But it needs to start now. I think that the phone calls and all can start right now, because they've gotten through Loretta Lynch. They're going to get through the trafficking bill. They're going to start working on the budget, but they're going to want to, unless members start to feel some heat, they're going to think it's okay to go forward with this. So, yes. Then.
If it's a treaty, it only has to be voted by the Senate and the House. It doesn't matter what the House believes, right?
But if they want to pass a bill that limits, for fast track, fast track authority has to go through both. The treaty itself would only be the Senate. And this bill that would provide more transparency would have to be both chambers.
But shouldn't we, since it's a vote on the treaty is the most important thing, shouldn't we be focused on the Senate?
Well, the fast track authority would come first, because that gives the president the authority to finish the negotiations and then present Congress with a fait accompli. So right now the fight is over fast track, but it's really like a proxy fight for the whole thing. So, anybody who hasn't, yes, in the back.
My imagination was almost 7 years, Harry Reid just put every bill in the bucket somewhere. Why is
A bucket of warm spit like the vice president.
Why is it not possible for McConnell? That's a key person. He doesn't have to bring it up. So if in fact we concentrate everything on McConnell, that bill doesn't even get voted on or in danger of being passed. Am I mistaken anywhere?
You're right that McConnell holds is a key here. I believe that McConnell always plays his cards very close to his chest and doesn't let on what he's thinking until he sees which way the wind is blowing. I believe that he would like to pass this.
How about Boehner?
But the thing about McConnell, Boehner definitely wants to pass it. The thing about McConnell is it's all going to depend on how many Republicans defect. And it's not the usual suspects either who always object to the immigration bill, like the people who objected to the Gang of Eight. I mean, Lindsey Graham lined up with Jeff Sessions. That's news. That's you don't see that ever. So I think they are going to be able to peel off a lot of Republicans. It just remains to be seen. If we need enough, we can't trust the Democrats to stick to their principles on this. Let's put it that way. They need to feel some voice of the voters. Yes?
The workers that are coming over under this thing, I mean, our workers have a specified length of time they can stay here. Do these workers have there any provisions that says they're coming over into this free trade thing that you can only get 2 years?
Well, we don't know, because that kind of level of detail is still secret. Secret, yes. I'm sure they've talked about it, but nobody knows yet what Obama's trade representative has promised. So,
Washington doing?
They don't listen. Do you get them on the phone?
At this point, not yet. I hope it doesn't come to that. John?
Jessica, as you the Constitution states that immigration, naturalization is the purview of the Congress. It's illegal. Isn't it illegal if they go ahead and put immigration in here? And it seems to me you have a legal argument if you're following the Constitution.
Yes, but if Congress ratifies that treaty, then it's, you know,
And they're not following it in the
but, well, the Senate. If the Senate ratifies a treaty that the president has negotiated, then it's, that trumps U.S. laws. Or at least, usually, and it's hard to say that it might be possible. Let me put it this way. Congress could try to change our law. You know, if let's say this trade agreement passes, and I'm talking about the actual agreement, not the fast-track authority, but whatever, let's say the Trans-Pacific Partnership comes into effect, and it allows, let's say, 500,000 guest workers from Mexico, or whatever, you know, some arbitrary limit that they've negotiated. And then 5 years down the road, Congress says, you know, that was really too high. We want to do it. Or the other areas are, you know, what the requirements are for employers to demonstrate before they bring in guest workers. You know, all the regulations are part of the agreement. If Congress goes to change them, I can't say that Congress wouldn't be able to. It's possible that Congress could change the law, and none of the other 12 countries would object. But what are the chances of that? I mean, we know from past experience with Canada and with India in particular that they argue that we are blocking access to their ability to provide free trade in services through Congress changing immigration laws. So it's a hypothetical, but I think we all know how this would come out. You know, if Congress changed the laws and took, you know, reneged on some of the promises that the administration made in negotiating that treaty and said, okay, we're going to go from 100,000 to 50,000 because of high unemployment in the U.S., there would be a trade dispute, and we would be taken to an international tribunal. And, you know, I can't say 100% certainty that, you know, it wouldn't go our way, but if I were a betting woman, I would definitely bet that we would lose. Because most of the time, I did a paper on this a while back, and I had some statistics on how many times the U.S. was ever successful in World Trade Organization disputes. It was rare. I mean,
so the only way a treaty can be overturned is if the signatures all agree.
mm-hmm.
So that's why if you get 10, 12, 15 countries, it's almost impossible.
Right. Who really thinks that Mexico would be willing to give up access to its work for its workers to come to the United States? This is their safety valve. These are their remittances. It's just, you know, and like the treaty doesn't, you know, like nobody's ever going to say, oh, Mexico would, you know, would negotiate. We know that that's not how that's not reality.
Trans-Pacific Partnership. How did Mexico get that?
Oh, well, they're on the Pacific too. Yeah, and Chile, and yeah, so.
How about getting the labor unions involved with
Richard
this?
Trump is against this, but
He is. The labor unions are against it.
Yeah, I mean, but big time, getting them to get out and speak.
Oh, they're out there. They're out there for sure. Definitely. So.
Well, that's a good point. Are there other pieces of this treaty that we haven't talked about tonight that have constituencies that would support our side of it? Stop it.
I think there are other constituencies on other issues that are opposed to the treaty. And again, it's environmentalists and people who tend to be against like child labor and, you know, want those kinds of protections. There's a whole range of issues that it touches on. The problem is their opposition will melt away if their concerns are met by the president. So, you know, and see, my position as an immigration expert is like, I'm not going to take a position on the climate change aspects of these treaties because I'm not an expert in that. if they say there's no immigration provisions in this, professionally, then I'm not going to talk about it. Personally, I might care for other reasons as a voter, but, I think the chances of them being able to be clever enough to resolve everyone's oppositions are pretty slim. But again, we can't count on, we have to advocate for.
So there's no sense in trying to cooperate with one of the just go ahead.
I think that's okay. I think it's a good way to make common cause. I think this is a great opportunity to reach out, as I said, to our congressional delegation because they're not hopeless on this, and just establish relationships with staffers that we haven't reached out to before. And I think it is, I don't have any suggestions for other groups, I don't know which environmental groups in particular are working on this. I know the labor unions are. But absolutely, if for those of you who are involved in other organizations, this is a good overlap. Yes?
So really, what's to keep any of us from losing our job to this? Because, say, I'm a teacher, and if they decide, well, we can get all these guest teachers in for half the salary, we're all gone too. It's all of us. Every single American that has a job, our job is now in jeopardy.
The potential, without trying to sound too apocalyptic, the potential is there over the long run for any of us, pretty much, to be competing in a global labor market, or at least one, defined by the 12 nations, just like the European Union is right now, where there is free movement of people within that treaty area. And, do I think that this would transform our communities overnight? No, not even in 5 years, but 10 years? 20 for sure.
It gives up our national sovereignty and trashes the Constitution even more. And that's been Obama's goal his whole time, that he wants to fundamentally transform America and trash the Constitution. Congress would just be giving him the authority to do that.
Right.
He thinks he's a dictator and acts like one, but could be an even bigger dictator. So it makes no sense for Congress to go along with this.
It doesn't, but again, it's been explained to them as if it's good for U.S. companies and, will employ people here. And and again, and there are some occupations that would be immediately affected, and those are especially the IT workers. It would not take long at all for a large number, more IT workers than even now, to be displaced by people coming in from other countries. So.
11 other countries wouldn't be against increasing the number. If the treaty had a limit of 500,000, and all of a sudden,
right.
U.S. says, let's bring in, 100,000.
Right. Oh, they're not.
The other countries would object to that.
Right. And then there will be pressure for people to be able to come here to study so they can get the degree that will allow them to work here, because after all, they have the right to work here. Why shouldn't they have the right to go to school here too? So, yes.
Maybe if we work something out to trade Obama for it'd be more powerful.